In a couple of months, it will have been a year since the public assassination of Charlie Kirk, an event that has become the focus of several conspiracy theories, largely coming through the platform of Candace Owens. And today we're going to be talking with Frank Turek to set the record straight. Frank was a friend and mentor of Charlie's. He was with Charlie on the day that he died. He was in the van on the way to the hospital, was with Charlie's friends and family. And since the event, he's been interviewed on various media outlets, always preaching the gospel because that's who he is, and sharing the story of what he experienced that horrible day. He's also been the target of Candace Owens, who has accused him of lying and implying that he's part of a larger conspiracy to betray and ultimately to kill Charlie Kirk. So was there drone footage the day of the event or not? And if not, why did Frank say that there was? Did he really perform CPR on Charlie? And what is being said about his cell phone? We're going to talk about all of it today. I really want to encourage you, please be praying for Frank and his family who are now receiving death threats over this. And also be praying for Erica Kirk, her children, her family, who have been just abused publicly since Charlie was murdered. It's so sad to me that we even have to do an episode like this, but I hope you'll find this episode clarifying. And I would encourage everyone to seek truth always. We're going to talk about the hallmarks of true eyewitness testimony and why Christians should care about the conspiracy theories that are being promoted by Candace Owens. And with that, I'll take you to my conversation with Frank Turek. Well, Frank, always great to have you on the show. We're going to be talking with you and Phoenix Hayes about your upcoming book, The War on Reality, in an episode coming up soon. But I wanted to just acknowledge that the first chapter of that book is all about the events that happened the day of the public assassination of Charlie Kirk that you were not just present for, but intimately involved in just the events because you were there with Charlie. You were in the van on the way to the hospital with Charlie. And of course, you have become the target of many conspiracy theories from the beginning, even ones that people have moved on from now and on to other ones. And so the first question I want to ask you is, how are you doing? How can my audience who's watching this episode and listening to this be praying for you and your family? How are you holding up under all of this?
Well, I think a lot of people have been praying, so I'm grateful for that because, look, I've never been through anything like this. I mean, who has? You know, you see a very good friend of yours shot in front of you and you take him to the hospital and, you know, he's dead. He was dead from the moment he was shot. But of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this does not look good. He's probably dead, but we got to try and revive him. And so I didn't know what to expect. Still don't know what to expect. It's over 10 months since. And the first person I think of when I wake up in the morning is Charlie. The last person I think of before I go to bed is Charlie. And people say that's PTSD. No, it's not PTSD. There's no disorder involved. That should happen. You know, when you see something like that, it's not a disorder. It's really what should happen. So, you know, I knew that Charlie would want us to continue doing what we're doing on college campuses. So the past 10 months have been a blur of going to college campus after college campus. I think we doubled the number of ones we normally go to, but I think the prayers have helped. I know they've helped Erica as well. And obviously, the one to pray for the most is Erica and her team, because she's trying to do several things at once. Obviously, she's trying to mourn. She's trying to run a massive organization. She's trying to bring up 2 kids. She's trying to readjust her life to the new normal, which was never anticipated. She's the one to pray for the most. And just a couple weeks ago, we were at the pretrial hearing, and that was, for lack of a better term, hell for 5 days for her. Mm-hmm. You know, you can imagine. A few times she had to leave the courtroom because she didn't want to hear. Even in the evening when we met, you know, I was about to describe something and she's like, "You're not going to say any details about the murder." No, I'm talking about something else. I mean, because she just doesn't want to hear it, and I understand. So, you know, I think when you look at her now and how she's performing, It can only be the Holy Spirit. I mean, how do you go on after this?
Yeah.
You know, how do you go on? Not just the fact that your husband has been publicly murdered, but she has been abused for
Yes.
the past 10 months online by people who say they were friends of Charlie. Really?
Yeah.
If you're a friend of Charlie, I don't know what an enemy is,
Right.
because it's been awful. I just had a guy write to my ministry saying, my wife is so involved in Candace Owens conspiracy theories, it's putting a strain on our marriage. What can I do? And I gave him a number of questions to ask her, but the top question in my mind would be this: if someone murdered me, would you want Candace to treat you like she's treating Erica?
Yeah.
And see what what the wife would say to that.
Yeah, and that's interesting you would bring that specific scenario up, because one of the things I wanted to talk about today is why this matters for Christians, because I have spoken out a few times, several times on X and on my podcast about some of the conspiracy theories that have come out of this whole thing. In fact, the first one was, I remember the day that Charlie was killed, and I didn't want to see it, but somebody had just held their phone up, and I saw it. And then later on throughout the day, there were different angles being shown, and I saw man in the white hat, and I thought, boy, that looks like Frank. Is that Frank? And I remember texting you and just saying, look, I don't know if you're there, but I'm praying for you guys. And I, of course, I knew how close you were with Charlie. And then, of course, it comes out that you were there and you were wearing a white hat, and then became the target of the first conspiracy theory that you were somehow giving signals to the shooter, which of course is ridiculous. So I made a video on Instagram and YouTube just basically saying, hey guys, the man in the white hat is Frank. We know him. Lots of us know him. He's a mentor to a lot of us. And so I thought, that'll clear that up. But ultimately, that had more views than almost anything I've ever done. And I realized then that people eat conspiracies for breakfast. They absolutely, I don't know what it is about. I don't know if it's related to gossip. It's related to some sort of, titillating morsel, as the Bible talks about gossip being. And then it has just snowballed largely through the vehicle of Candace Owens, who has also targeted you personally, which is one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on today. Because not only do I want to stand with you, but I want my audience to see through the absolute wicked deception that is being facilitated through her platform. So we're going to talk about a lot of that today. But the first thing I want to talk about is why this matters for Christians, kind of back to my original thought here. Because every time I've posted about Candace Owens, I get a couple of extreme reactions. Of course, I get all of the people that are under her spell into my comments. I expect that. But what is sometimes unexpected is Christians on the other side of the fence who are just like, this is a distraction. We shouldn't even be talking about this. Just ignore it. It'll go away. We don't need to be addressing this. We just need to be preaching the gospel and focusing on our Christian lives. We don't need to be getting in the mud of all of this. And I get that to a certain extent. I get it's convoluted, it's complicated, but it's also extremely wicked. And as you just brought up, it's actually affecting people's actual marriages, their real lives, your real life, Erica's real life, Charlie's family's real life, TPUSA employees' real lives. And it is not just negatively affecting them, but as you said, you're getting death threats. Your family is getting death threats. So other than that obvious reason, why do you think this matters for Christians? Why do we actually need to be engaging with the deceptions that are coming from the Candace Owens platform?
Well, God is very overt about what we ought to be doing, especially with widows and orphans, not just in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament as well. In fact, in Exodus 22:22, it essentially says that if anyone abuses a widow or the fatherless, and they cry out to me, God says, I will hunt that person down with the sword, the one who's abusing the widow or the fatherless, and kill them. I mean, that's pretty extreme. Also in Deuteronomy 19, it says that if you falsely accuse someone of a crime and you're found out, you get the penalty of that crime. So if you falsely accuse someone of murder, which Candace Owens appears to have done in several different ways, You're the one that would be executed if you're found out falsely accusing someone. I mean, this would shut down the internet, basically,
Yeah.
Alisa. And of course, James talks about this. Paul talks about this, that this is true religion, that we take care of widows and orphans. And if we're not going to defend them, who is? Why wouldn't we defend widows and orphans? And why wouldn't we want the truth to come out rather than have people get drug into a cult-like relationship with someone when there's no evidence that anything Candace Owens says regarding this murder is actually true? Do you notice that in the pretrial hearing, the defense team didn't make any of the claims that Candace Owens has made? They didn't claim Tyler Robinson was not on campus. They didn't claim that it wasn't a 30-odd 6. They didn't claim that Tyler Robinson didn't confess to the crime or that he's a patsy. They didn't claim any of that stuff. They didn't say anything about Egyptian planes or the French government or the Israelis. And if you're going to say, well, that's because it's all a grand conspiracy, then my question would be, what evidence would you need if Tyler Robinson really did kill Charlie and acted alone? What evidence would you need to believe that? I mean, if every piece of evidence that comes out against Tyler Robinson is part of the conspiracy, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's no way of detecting whether that conspiracy is true or false because you've already assumed it's true.
Yeah.
So it's very important that we speak the truth because so many people are being caught up in lies. As I mentioned, the man that reached out to me, I did a whole podcast on it last week about help. My marriage is in trouble because of the fact that my spouse is believing in conspiracy theories. I did a whole podcast on it, and so many people in the comments are going, "Yeah, that's in my marriage too," or "That's in my friends or my extended family." It's like we can't even talk about anything anymore because they actually think that there's been a huge conspiracy to kill Charlie Kirk, and if I don't see it somehow, I'm misled. When in fact, it appears the exact opposite is true.
Yeah. I've done a recent study on justice, biblical justice. And of course, you're going to get the nature and character of God all throughout Scripture from Genesis to Revelation. And in the Old Testament, we have these punishments for certain sins that should really make us see how much God hates that particular sin. Like if a sin in the Old Testament was punished worse than another sin, we know that that sin is worse as far as how, God feels about that. And it over and over again directly addresses widows. Like I was just thinking about even in the New Testament, in James, where it says, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and keep oneself unstained from the world. And then if you go back to Isaiah 1:17, when it's talking about justice, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. And here we have this situation when an entire, it seems like, community, I don't know how many people are really buying into this. It seems like enough are at least curious about it to give the numbers to Candace that they're giving. But it's like they're, to me, this is so much more important than just ignore it, it'll go away. We have to just, do our preaching the gospel thing. Well, part of preaching the gospel is to rescue people from wickedness and from lies. And so there's a lot going on here. It seems to me that, number one, there's so many different variables being introduced that you almost could never keep up with it. There's just every day it's something new. And it's always like when one thing gets debunked, it's another thing. Well, what if this? What if that? And the most recent one that I saw, even just in the last couple of days, is that Candace was implying, of course, just asking questions, where she says that, maybe Charlie was killed because he refused to kill me. That's what Candace Owens is saying. She's positing that maybe Charlie was killed because he wouldn't kill her. The whole thing is so convoluted, so ridiculous, and I'm just going to say so evil. And I've said this on X, and I don't normally get this strong on my podcast, but I want to speak to the women who are watching this and listening to this. If you are enticed by the type of material that Candace Owens is putting out. I don't know how else to say this, but you need to repent, because there's nothing about this. At best, it's a distraction that's keeping you from spending time with your family, with your husband, doing the things you should be doing as a Christian woman. But at worst, you're participating in a great evil that is really harming people in a very real way. And so I want to just add my voice to that this matters, because, yeah, it'd be easier to just ignore it. It'd be easier to just say, well, that's over there. I'm just going to stay in my lane over here. But as you mentioned with the marriages and what people are bringing up, this is actively affecting the very real lives of very real people. Charlie Kirk loved his country and inspired such patriotism among the younger generation. And I love my country, which is one of the reasons I love Good Ranchers. It is American, born, raised, and harvested, grass-fed beef, better than organic chicken. And it shows up at my door every single month. I can put it in the freezer, and it makes it so much easier to think about what I'm going to serve my family, because I just pull something out, thaw it out, and it makes it simple. And I don't have all of that fatigue at the grocery store. Plus, I learned that a lot of the grass-fed beef that I was paying top dollar for at the grocery store is coming from overseas, where they don't have the highest transparency or quality standards. So I love Good Ranchers, not just for those reasons, but because they are unapologetically Christian and pro-life. If you've never tried Good Ranchers, it's such a wonderful company because the customer service is so great. You can go on the website and you can skip your box, you can pause your membership, you can cancel all from the website. Super easy to navigate. And if you subscribe right now to Good Ranchers, they're celebrating with $50 off your first order. So go to goodranchers.com today. You can use my code Alisa at checkout to get $50 off anything on their site. So remember, that's code Alisa for $50 off. But you can also get free meat with every order on top of that $50 off if you decide to start your subscription plan today. So go to goodranchers.com today and use my code Alisa.
Let's zoom out for a second to 100,000 feet,
Yeah.
if we can, Alisa, to give people a little perspective. Jesus and the apostles call Satan a murderer, liar, accuser, and slanderer, seeking to steal, kill, and destroy. Notice we had a murder on 9/10. Then right after the greatest evangelical event in history, where more people heard the gospel than at any other time in history at one time.
Yep.
What have we had since then? We've had lies, accusations, and slander seeking to steal, kill, and destroy. And people say they don't believe in the demonic. How could it be more obvious?
Yeah.
It's exactly what Jesus and the apostles said Satan does. He lies, he accuses, and he slanders, seeking to steal, kill, and destroy, right after a murder. How could it be more obvious? And you're buying into this? And I think part of this, too, is the idea. Let's be fair here in the sense that since COVID especially, people are hyper skeptical of anything the government does, and sometimes for good reason, right?
Yeah.
But that is a fallacy to say that everything the government does, therefore, has to be wrong, or there has to be a grand conspiracy behind it. And maybe a little bit later, we can talk about what is required for a successful conspiracy. Conspiracies do happen, but you have to have evidence for them to detect them. And there has to be certain requirements in place in order for a conspiracy to be pulled off, none of which exist in this case.
Right. I mean, just the fact alone of how many people I want to invite everyone who's listening to us to really think this through. Think about how many people would have to be in on it with no whistleblowers. Like nobody's saying anything different. They would all have to be so many people, all of TPUSA, all of Erica's family and Charlie's extended family, everyone involved in your ministry, me, everybody that's even remotely connected to this thing would have to be maintaining the same narrative. And all of those people would have to be, think about how wicked every single one of those people would have to be to maintain a lie like this. I mean, you'd have to just be diabolical. And just even on its face, it's just not possible. I don't even think it's plausible.
No, not only that, but think about this. Candace Owens said everyone betrayed Charlie, right? Including TPUSA. And there are people in TPUSA that really know the truth. Think about this for a second. Let's suppose that was true. that TPUSA, people within TPUSA were somehow in on it. Candace Owens has made millions of dollars doing this. What would you, if this really happened and a lie was trying to be held together, don't you think there would be someone within TPUSA that had knowledge of this but wasn't complicit in it? They just had knowledge, who would start a podcast and say, I'm going to reveal to you really what happened, just like Candace Owens, piece by piece. That person within a couple of months would make millions of dollars just on the ad revenue, just on what YouTube would pay them if they were to leak out the entire conspiracy. Yet nobody has done that. Why? Because it didn't happen.
Yeah.
People would go to the authorities, even if they were involved, and say, I know the inside story, give me immunity. And then they could leak the whole thing out.
Yeah.
Right? It's ridiculous to believe. And one of the requirements of a conspiracy is you need a small group of people who it's best if they're related so they don't rat one another out. It's very difficult to hold a conspiracy together that involves the Egyptian government, the Israeli government, the U.S. government, TPUSA,
all of
Erica,
the attorneys,
it's bizarre to even suggest that.
Yeah, I watched a good bit of the pretrial hearing, and it is so obvious that all of the evidence is pointing toward Tyler Robinson. He confessed on more than one occasion. You have the testimony of his lover. You have all of this that is leading even his own parents. Honestly, I just sit back and it's puzzling, but I also know what a tremendous deceiver our enemy is. The devil, like you mentioned, a liar and a murderer from the beginning. And so I want to ask you one question, then we'll get into some of the more specific conspiracies as they relate to you. But one question I've asked myself, and I'd love to know if you've pondered this question, but as you mentioned, you have this assassination event, Charlie Kirk, Christian martyr in the United States of America. It's kind of what we're seeing, unprecedented. Then at his memorial, the gospel is preached, as you mentioned, to more people at one time throughout the world than ever before. And I was there, and I remember feeling so hopeful about the direction things were going, as far as it's like I can see how God is turning this for good. Of course, it's awful and it's tragic and it's horrific and painful, but he's using this to bring revival among our nation. And I was optimistic about that. I even have mentioned several times on my podcast how a couple of girls from high school even reached out to me who decided to follow Jesus as a result of all of this. And as far as I know, and still are, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And then you have this thing that comes in and seems to hijack the whole thing. And then my question is, of course, I'm not God. I don't know his wisdom. I don't have his wisdom or his knowledge, but why would God allow this to happen when there's such a momentum heading toward revival?
Well, if he were to stop every evil act that anyone ever wanted to do, he could have stopped the murder too, right? I mean, so God can get his will done even through the evil choices that we make. There's always a ripple effect. In Charlie's case, it wasn't a ripple, it was a tsunami of good. I mean, I still get emails from people, even when I travel, people will say, I became a Christian at that memorial service.
Wow.
I had people email me from Sweden saying, I've been an atheist for 26 years. Now I'm a Christian because of Charlie Kirk. It still happens.
Yeah.
People send me stuff. They're sending Erica a lot more, obviously, but I get paintings of Charlie. I get, people sending me books about Charlie. First of all, his life affected so many people. And even in his death, he's affecting so many people. So even when we can't see the good, God can bring good from it. But he's not going to interrupt every evil choice we make. If that were the case, this wouldn't be a moral universe. You and I couldn't even exist because we do evil. I always ask people this question, and our friend Greg Kokel is famous for saying this. If God were to stop evil at midnight tonight, would you still be alive at 12:01?
Right.
My answer is no, because we all do evil every day to a certain extent. I'm certainly not following Jesus 100%. So God can still bring good from evil. But that doesn't mean we don't fight evil. We should fight evil. We should call evil out. And that's what we're trying to do right now on this podcast, that a great evil occurred and now more people are piling on with more evil. And we need to speak out against it to protect people who are being deceived by it.
Amen. And I want to go ahead and turn now to the specific claims that Candace Owens has made against you personally. And I want to be clear, this isn't about, clearing Frank Turek's name or something along those lines. It has to do with speaking truth and standing up for what's real. And you are in the unique position to be able to refute these claims because you were there and they're being made about you, which, when people believe lies, that's going to impact what they're going to believe about other parts of your message and the message of the gospel. So this is important stuff. But let's start with the cell phone. So the claim is that, so apparently when you were first, I remember when this all happened, and then you were sort of going on different shows and you were sharing the story of what had happened. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard bits and pieces of that already, and feel free to share any of that as you work through some of these things. But you had mentioned to Megyn Kelly that you were on FaceTime with I believe it was your son and your daughter-in-law at the time of the shooting. And actually, when you see the video from a certain angle, you can actually see that you've got your phone like this and you're on FaceTime. And then the shooting happens, you put the phone in your pocket, and then you told Megyn Kelly, you said, I didn't turn it off. It was on until I got to the hotel. And then you kept talking. And then later you said, no, it was the hospital. And so Candace is saying, look, he's lying. He's not telling the truth. The story keeps changing, which, first of all, I'm going to let you say, your piece here, but people, have you never misspoken? I told you, Frank, before we went on the air, my head gets ahead of my words sometimes, and I'll go back and listen to a podcast. I'm like, oh, I said the wrong word there. I didn't mean to say that. Every human being does that, now especially compounded by having just been through a traumatic event. So maybe explain in your own words what had happened. And then, of course, Candace is just looking for every little nitpicky detail to blow into this huge, massive thing that otherwise shouldn't be. One of the ministries that I am so proud to partner with on this podcast is Alliance Family Services. This is a ministry whose vision is to compete directly with Planned Parenthood by operating a nationwide network of reproductive healthcare clinics that are medically exceptional and unapologetically Christian. They believe that Christians should have the corner on reproductive healthcare because God is the giver of life. They provide extensive reproductive services, including, of course, pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, but also STI testing and treatment, well woman exams, pap smears, and lots of stuff that Planned Parenthood does not provide. They also provide life-affirming prenatal care to 20 weeks. They are one of the few pregnancy help organizations who give 24/7 care. They do abortion reversal 24/7. I love this ministry so much. We donate to this ministry, and I want to encourage you to donate to them as well. You can go to alliancefamilyservices.org/Alisa today and make a donation, or you can sign up to give monthly. Again, that's alliancefamilyservices.org/Alisa.
Yeah, I was on Megyn Kelly, I don't know how many days after the murder, but it was within a week or two. And I was telling Megyn what had happened. When I go to an event, my own event on a college campus, if 300 people show up, that's kind of an average crowd. The biggest crowd we've ever had was 1,200. I've never seen a crowd like they were there that day on 9/10 for Charlie. Of course, it was outdoors. There had to be, I thought 6,000. Some people are saying there was 3,000. There were people everywhere. And they weren't even coming to hear a speech. They were there to hear a 31-year-old young man answer questions about politics and Christianity. And I was just amazed by it. It was like a Trump rally, but better in terms of enthusiasm. I mean, people were just all around us. And I felt, coming in there, I literally said to Charlie when we got, that's another thing, drone footage. We can talk about that in a minute. But we had overhead footage. I said to Charlie, I don't like this place. There's too many buildings. And he just kind of shrugged it off because he was brave and he wanted to reach people. And you have to a certain extent, expose yourself to people if you're going to love them. You can't wall yourself off completely. And the chief, the police said they had the rubes and all this. And so, okay, we're fine. Let's go. So the enthusiasm was so great that I just wanted to show my wife, Stephanie. So I texted her, and she happened to be she was back in Phoenix. We're, of course, in Utah, and her mother lives in Phoenix, and her sister. So I texted them. I mean, I FaceTimed them really quickly, and I said, "Hey, look at this. Look at the crowd here." And I said, "Let me call Spencer," because Spencer's our middle son, who's a big Charlie fan. I said, let me call Spencer and show him this. And of course, his wife, Caroline, is there too. So after I'm on with just a minute with Stephanie, I FaceTime Spencer and Caroline. And so it's maybe the second question. That's when Charlie was shot, the second question. And so I'm just standing maybe 25 feet off his right elbow. He's under the tent. I'm just outside the tent. And that's when the shot rings out. And so I didn't know I said this, but Caroline told me later, the first thing you said was, no, 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 no. And so I'm looking, and I kind of duck because I think, oh, maybe there's more shots coming as I'm heading toward Charlie. And I just put the phone in my back pocket. And but his security team are on him already. So I just run with them to the SUV. And so I tell Megan, I said, I put the phone in my back pocket. I did not hang up. I didn't even think about hanging up. I'm concerned about Charlie at that point. And so they hear the entire ride, to the hospital, everything. They can't see anything because it's in my back pocket. And I say to Megan, I didn't hang up until we got to the hotel. And what I meant to say was hospital.
Right.
Because the hotel wasn't for like another 8 or 9 hours. I can't remember how long it was, but the hotel was in Salt Lake City that we ultimately went to. We were at that hospital probably from about a little after 12:30 when we got there till like 6 o'clock-ish somewhere. We were there for, 5.5, 6 hours before we left the hotel. I mean, I said it again, left the hospital to go to the hotel, right?
Yeah.
And look, I have this condition known as 64. Sometimes I forget things. Sometimes I put the wrong word in. In fact, when I was at AmFest, which was 3 months after the murder, I had a platform speech. And I literally said in the speech, I said, and now people are running down, I'm speaking about Erica, are running down her widow. I said her widow. Mm-hmm. I should have said his widow, right? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I got off the platform, my wife said to me, "Did you know you said her widow?" I said, "What? I didn't mean to say her widow." I looked at the tape. I said her widow. What an idiot. If you've never misspoken, are you perfect? Especially after a traumatic event. I mean, I do that all the time. I sometimes call my grandkids the wrong names.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. All the time. Yeah.
And this is supposed to be a lie. I guess the moral of the story is not every difference is a lie.
Yeah.
Not every false statement is a lie. Sometimes you just say things wrongly. Sometimes you're misinformed. Maybe we can talk about the drones, and I can tell you about that as well.
Well, yeah. And just to add to this, I remember the scenario I keep thinking about with this cell phone, you misspeaking. On 9/11, to the best of my memory, I was in Ontario, California at the airport getting ready to fly home to Nashville. I was sitting on a plane. They made us get off the planes, obviously, because 9/11 had happened. And there was a lot of chaos in the airport. People were upset. They were making everybody get their bags off of the bag claim. People were renting cars. Nobody knew what had happened. And, for maybe a younger generation, they're like, how could you not know what happened? Well, it's because we didn't have social media like we have today. I don't remember if any kind of social media existed yet, but I didn't have social media at that time. I wasn't on social media. And so you were kind of reliant on the news and maybe word of mouth to figure out what had happened. And I remember very distinctly somebody coming on the microphone over the whole airport saying, there's been a terrorist attack and the Twin Towers have been bombed. And I remember at that moment, everything went very still and quiet. Everybody became very polite and conscientious. and people just started doing what they needed to do, and it was very somber. But of course, we know now the Twin Towers were not bombed. And so I don't
Mm.
know if she misspoke or if maybe she heard they blew up and maybe just assumed it was a bomb and she said that. But it was inaccurate information, but that doesn't mean she was lying. And
Mhm,
and that's
mhm.
the nature of how information works. You can actually misspeak as a part of a human error. You can, there's lots of different reasons, but it doesn't mean that somebody's lying or covering up for something. And like I said before, especially after such a traumatic event. So it just seems ridiculous to me that somebody would magnify that one time of misspeaking into like, oh, well, you must be a part of this huge conspiracy that's covering up and all of these other things that are going on. It's not rational. It's just not rational.
No,
It's,
not only that, but it's irrelevant. It's an
yeah,
irrelevant detail.
it is. Yeah,
Like
yeah,
whether you shut off your FaceTime at the hospital or the hotel, what does that matter? Why would that's not even a detail that would feed into the conspiracy theory one way or the other,
right.
right?
Exactly.
Um, and
It's
so
just an excuse to magnify
yeah,
something and then cast suspicion on
mhm,
everything else. That's ultimately what that
yeah,
tactic is. So, and then in a similar sense, it was the drone footage. So you had said something along the lines of there was drone footage. You got to see the size of the crowd, and then one of the
mhm.
security team leader had said, well, maybe I'll let you say it because I don't want to get it inaccurate, but maybe that there wasn't drones or maybe there was. I'm not even still sure what that whole thing's about.
Well, when we got Charlie got on his phone overhead footage of the crowd maybe an hour before we were getting there. And that's when I said to him, I don't like this place. There's too many buildings. And I just assumed it was drone footage. Because whenever you see aerial footage, what are you going to say? Oh, in today's day and age, it's drone footage. Brian Harpool on the Sean Ryan show said there were no drones up. We didn't have authorization for that. So he said there were no drones up. So, okay, now he would say, Candace originally said, well, one of these two people is lying, right? And either Frank's lying or Brian Harpool's lying. And she originally said, well, Frank's a military man. He wouldn't lie. Okay. So she sided with me on that, right? But what turned out was, in retrospect, there was a there was a building above us. Like, to come to where the murder took place, you had to go under an opening, like a breezeway, and the tent was set up right there and opened up to the amphitheater. And above us was like one of those enclosed walkways kind of thing. And on top of it, you could walk on the top as well. And so there were protesters up there that the police were supposed to move off so they couldn't throw stuff down on Charlie. But before the event, you could be up there, and there were people up there during the event with your cell phone showing an aerial view of the crowd. So it may have come from someone just on that walkway, or it may have been a drone that Brian didn't know about, because someone could have had a drone up before the event, like maybe the PR team, and took video from there. But again, this is an irrelevant detail. Whether there was a drone up or not doesn't somehow feed into a conspiracy. I thought
Right.
there was, Brian thought there wasn't, but either I was misinformed, he was misinformed, or both of us were and didn't even think that somebody could just be on that bridge. But
Yeah.
what does it matter?
Right.
Other than to try and say, oh, these are liars. Why would I lie about how does a lie about that affect the conspiracy theory?
Many Christian parents are wondering, how can we teach our kids things like critical thinking so they don't fall for conspiracy theories? How do we teach them a biblical worldview? How do we teach them what other religions believe so that we can compare that to Christianity and explain to them why Christianity is true? Well, in this culture, even our youngest kids are presented with so many truth claims every single week, and the biblical worldview curriculum from Foundation Worldview solves this problem. In fact, Foundation Worldview, all of their curriculums are my number one recommendation education for the younger elementary school age. We did the biblical worldview curriculum in our home, in our homeschool, and my son and I together learned to explore basic questions like, what is truth? Who is God? How did life begin? What does it mean to be human? How can I tell right from wrong? What I love about these curriculums is that you can adapt and implement them really easily for the home or for the church or for your Christian school. And so this is designed for really intentional parents, church leaders, and Christian educators to take a proactive approach to avoid that future pain point of realizing that the children in their care have subtly bought into secular ideologies. Go to foundationworldview.com today. Use my code Alisa for 10% off any family, church, or Christian school license. Again, that's foundationworldview.com. Use my code Alisa. That's such a good point. That's like,
Yeah.
why would you lie about that?
Yeah.
If you're trying to cover up this massive conspiracy, why would that be the lie you would choose? All that would do is, if somebody discovered that, would poke holes in your credibility, which is ridiculous. And I think it's perfectly natural to assume an aerial shot like that was a drone. I mean, we're in an age of drones. That makes perfect sense to think, oh, that was drone footage. And again, that doesn't mean that you're lying, which is just that this whole thing is just so bizarre to me. But let's talk about
No,
the
I wish
CP.
the cops had a drone up there. They would have seen that
Yeah,
Tyler Robinson was on that roof.
yeah,
There should
yeah,
have been a drone up.
yeah. There you go.
Actually, they should have had someone on the roof as well. And the text I saw the day of the murder from Dan, one of Charlie's security team, was the police saying, we got the roofs.
Wow. So is there
And
any investigation happening there about what happened with that, or?
yes, there is. It's about to be released. I don't know if it's been released yet, but in talking to folks there at TPUSA who are following this, they said, yes, there's been an investigation. And at any point, that investigation is going to be released. It's being done by the university itself. And we'll see what happens when it comes out. But I won't pass comment on it until I see it. But I'd be concerned about that report to see if it's really honest.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll be looking out for that as well. But this final claim that Candace has made specifically about you and what you've said is that you have stated that you attempted CPR on Charlie. And then one of his security team, I believe, said that no one did CPR. So it's like somebody's lying. Again, Candace trying to cast suspicion on the testimony.
Yeah. Well, here's what happened. When we got into the car, Charlie's bleeding everywhere from the neck. And so we're all trying to stop the bleeding. I'm over the seat looking down on him. Rick's to my left with Charlie's head. Brian's to my right at his kind of midsection or legs. And his legs are out the door because he's too tall. We can't even close the door. So we drove all the way to the hospital with the door open. And we're trying to stop the bleeding. And Brian's right that throughout most of the ride, there was no CPR done. We're just trying to stop the bleeding. And you can't really do CPR on somebody bleeding because, you're just pushing more blood out, basically.
Yeah.
But toward the very end of the ride, I thought to myself, it's been several minutes since he's been shot. If there's any hope of him being revived, if we don't try and start his heart, if we don't try and get air in him, and he has brain damage, I'll never be able to live with myself. You didn't at least try, right? What I got to lose, right? So it's like the last 20 or 30 seconds of the ride, I tried to get his heart started and I blew air into his mouth. Last 20 or 30 seconds. Now, we're yanking and banking through the parking lot at that point, or coming into the parking lot. Like, look, is this a hospital? This is, and whether Brian noticed that or not, I don't know. Maybe just forgot about it. Maybe, it was such a short attempt. Brian said on Sean Ryan's show that Charlie had doll eyes. Doll eyes, they're just staring. They're not tracking with anything. And that's the first thing I noticed when we got him in the car. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking right past me, into eternity. He was already gone. But I hadn't seen anybody shot. I hadn't seen anybody dead like that. I don't know if Brian had or not. So while I'm thinking in the back of my head, he's dead, I'm going, what do I got to lose? Right?
Yeah.
Got to try. And when we got him into the hospital, they did get his heart started, because the surgeon later told us, although he was already dead, you can start a healthy person's heart even after they're already dead, because if the body is young and strong, you can do that. And that's what happened. And when we got that report, we're like, okay, who knows? Maybe there's hope. Maybe he'll make it. I don't know. So
yeah.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
There's morbid details that I won't even say when I tried to blow into his mouth.
Yeah. Well,
so
what I keep thinking about, you go ahead.
Yeah, Brian's not lying. Most of the ride was just stop the bleeding and let's just get there. Yeah. Right. It's only the last 20 or 30 seconds of the ride. I'm going, well, what have I got to lose?
Yeah.
Right. And look, I'm the only one in the car that's not on security. I'm the only, while I was in the Navy years ago, I haven't done CPR in anyone in a long time. I'm just like, I'm going to try. And I'm the only one in a position that could have done it, because they're like they have Charlie's kind of body kind of resting on them. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm over the top.
Yeah.
So, and this is another detail. What does this have to do with a conspiracy?
Yeah.
Like, why would anybody lie about CPR or no CPR? And then there's another thing about shards of glass. People are saying there are shards of glass. I don't remember any shards of glass in that car. Maybe there was, but and this is by the way, a nature of eyewitness testimony. You focus in on different things. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, actually, that's where I was going to go next, because every description that you're giving on all three of these points to authentic eyewitness testimony. When you think about the characteristics of real eyewitness testimony, you're going to have agreement about the central event that happened. The main event is going to have unanimous agreement. But to know that it's authentic, there has to be some differences in the periphery details, because people are looking at different things. They're focused on different things. There's going to be testimony coming from different perspectives. We see this in the four Gospels. And there's going to be the effects of the traumatic event, the stressors that are on you, that, shock, all sorts of different things that are going to be involved. But as our friend J. Warner Wallace pointed out in his book, Cold Case Christianity, of course, Jim's was a detective in Los Angeles for many years and solved many cold cases. And one of the points he brought out in his book that always stayed with me, a couple of things. The first one was that he had this one crime that happened where he got to the crime scene and it had been raining. And because it was raining, they had put all four of the witnesses, or however many there were, all together in the back of a police car. And he knew instantly, well, their testimony's no good, because now they've had time to kind of collaborate, get together, figure out, they're going to be filling in gaps, and they're all going to be telling now the same story. Whereas for him to really get to the truth, he needs their different perspectives. And then he gave this other example of a robbery that had happened in, I think it was a convenience store, and there were two witnesses. And there was a female witness and a male witness, and the female witness kept noticing the clothes of the perpetrator, and she had no idea what kind of gun he had. Whereas the man knew exactly the kind of gun, the caliber, everything, but kind of, I think he said the wrong color shirt that the guy was wearing. Well, it turns out the woman was very into fashion. That's what she was focused on. And the man was into guns. I mean, it makes sense that even he got a detail wrong about the clothes, because that's not what he was focused on. And that actually helps police officers get to the authentic event that happened. And if both of those people were telling verbatim, word for word, the exact same testimony, then you would know they colluded. You would know that they had gotten their stories straight, and then you'd be more suspicious of the overall narrative that they were giving. But maybe can you add to that when we talk about authentic eyewitness testimony?
Yeah, I would say it's quite obvious that Brian and I have not tried to get our stories to align.
Right.
In fact, Brian right now is in a lawsuit against Candace Owens. I assume it's because he's lost income and his character has been besmirched by her. So he couldn't even comment on this right now if he wanted to. But we may have exchanged one text or two ever since this has happened. Like when he was on Sean Ryan, I said, "Hey, good job there," that kind of thing. But we haven't said, "Well, what did you see? What did it?" No, we haven't done any of that. Yeah. We're just telling our story as we saw it. The facts as we saw them. And by the way, there's a famous situation that we brought up before, that the eyewitnesses of the Titanic differed on how the Titanic sank, right? Now, why? Why did they differ? Well, first of all, they were in shock. Secondly, it was dark. Thirdly, they're on probably different aspects of the ship. They may, if you're on the beam of the ship, maybe you could see it break before it went down. If you're on the bow of the stern, you couldn't, right? There's different perspectives. But what do they all agree on? They all agree the Titanic sank. They agree on the big issue. The Titanic sank. They disagree on how it sank. We discovered later that it did break in two somehow because we've discovered the wreckage. But just because eyewitnesses don't agree on details doesn't mean that the whole story is false. And yet people seem to think that if you find any inconsistency, somehow the whole story is got to be false. They're lying about everything. That does not follow. And I have no motivation to lie about anything. There's no motivation at all. I saw my friend murdered. I'm just telling you what I saw and what happened. Yeah. I mean, why make stuff? Well, for what reason?
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, I shared in a recent podcast, I did a podcast maybe 3 or 4 episodes ago about conspiracy theories and how important it is to learn to think critically so that we are not deceived by things like this. And I confessed on that episode that many years ago when the Sandy Hook shooting happened, there were some details. I was very interested in that. Of course, I was heartbroken to hear what happened. And so I started watching a lot of news stories, and I was watching interviews with some of the families and all sorts of things. And there seemed to be details that were not lining up for me. I had a feeling in my gut that something wasn't right about this. And this was before I had learned to think critically. I realize now, all those years ago, I really did think with my feelings a lot. I thought with my emotions and my instincts, my gut. And sometimes your gut is right, but sometimes it's wrong. And I remember becoming persuaded that something just was fishy about this thing. But Frank, what kept me from saying something online, of course, this is, again, before I learned the skills of critical thinking and when I started learning apologetics, what kept me from saying that publicly and promoting that idea was I thought, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? And then there are families that have children who have just been horrifically killed, that would really harm them to be saying these things. And I guess I thought critically enough to say, and I don't have all the details. I'm not a police officer that has access to all of the evidence. I'm not an investigator that is there, boots on the ground. So at that point, I was okay to just keep an open hand about it. Now, of course, years later, now that I've learned the skills of critical thinking and I've taken a look at it again, I realized that I was wrong to think there was a conspiracy that had happened at Sandy Hook. But the reason I bring that up in this episode is because what I'm really wanting to ask anybody who's watching us today or listening to us, and perhaps you are persuaded by some of the speculations that are coming from the Candace Owens platform, I would just like to invite you to ask yourself, what if you're wrong? What if you're wrong? And Candace Owens is openly mocking someone who has had their husband publicly executed and is absolutely devastated and heartbroken about it. What if you're wrong? What is that doing to people like Frank, who's receiving death threats, people that worked with Charlie that are receiving death threats and having their character dragged through the mud? What if you're wrong? And that might be a question I would invite you to ask yourself. And then the second question that I've mentioned before that I will bring up again is, how is this leading you closer to the Lord? How is following all of this and falling for all of this, how is this advancing you in your growing in the grace and knowledge of Jesus? How is this sanctifying you? How is this making you look more like Jesus, transforming you into the image and likeness of Jesus? And I think those are two key questions to ask yourself if you're enticed by a lot of this. Is there anything you'd add to that, Frank?
I would ask the question, what evidence would you need to see to have you conclude that Tyler Robinson really killed Charlie Kirk? What evidence would you need to see?
Yeah.
And if there's no evidence that would convince you of that, then you're actually not seeking justice. You can't achieve justice without evidence. You need evidence to figure out what really happened. There's been no evidence given. There's been a lot of possibilities,
Yep.
but possibilities are not evidence. It's possible that aliens killed Charlie. That's possible. It's possible we're in the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of possibilities, but possibilities are not evidence. This is why in the pretrial hearing, nobody brought up anything Candace has said, because there's no evidence for anything Candace has said that relates to this murder. And if Tyler Robinson did not have anything to do with this, why did his parents turn him in? Why did he turn himself in? Why is the judge keeping him locked up? Is everybody involved in this conspiracy? For what reason? Oh, and if Israel wanted to kill them, or Egypt, or whoever, do you think they would do it in front of 6,000 people where cameras are rolling? Right. I mean, if Mossad really wanted somebody dead, would they do it publicly? Or would they kill somebody privately in an accident where there would be no suspicion, right? Maybe his plane went down. Maybe his car got into an accident. Maybe he had a heart attack induced by some poison given him,
or
right?
just out walking in front of his house.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's... Well, we went on several walks.
Yeah,
and we always had a 300-pound bodyguard behind us for that very reason.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted Charlie Kirk dead, they didn't have to do it, or some foreign government or some, they didn't have to do it in front of 6,000 people with cameras rolling.
Yeah.
It takes a lot more faith to believe what any of these conspiracy theories are saying than just to look at the evidence as given. I mean, his DNA is all over the place. He's got confessions 3 different ways. Now, look, everybody's innocent till proven guilty. We haven't had a real trial yet. We just had a pretrial hearing. So we'll wait till it's all done. But the folks who are peddling conspiracy theories are not assuming innocence until proven guilty. They're assuming guilt until proven innocent. And you can't prove a negative claim. You can't. Your job in our court system is not to prove you're innocent. It's the prosecution's job to prove that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond all doubt. How does anyone prove they weren't involved?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because anything's possible.
Right.
It's the prosecution's job, but it just strains. It's ridiculous to suggest Tyler Robinson didn't kill Charlie Kirk at this point. Again, he's still got a trial, innocent until proven guilty. But given the evidence we've seen,
it's a slam dunk. Yeah,
it's a slam dunk, as Jonathan Turley of George Washington University has said, the attorney there. It's a slam dunk.
Yeah.
And the only question now is, unless something comes out of the blue, the only question now is the defense going to go to the prosecution and the judge and say, we'd like to plead guilty in exchange for life without parole?
Yeah.
And the prosecution, I think, would be would be silly to take that deal, because if he's really guilty, he does deserve the death penalty. And it's easy to show he's guilty in this case, at least from what we've seen so far.
Well, Frank, I hate that you've had to relive this so many times publicly, but I want to commend you for how you've handled yourself from the beginning. You've been an example to all of us. And a lot of people don't know this, but you're not just a mentor to Charlie. You're a mentor to many of us in the apologetics community. And it's been it's been amazing to see how what you've always taught, because I've known you now for 10 years, what you've always taught is what comes out when you're really put your feet to the fire. So I want to commend you for that. Is there anything that you did not have the opportunity to say here today that you'd like to say? And also let people know where they can connect with you and your ministry if they're unfamiliar.
Yeah, thanks, Alisa. We have a podcast called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. There's 2 a week. Crossexamine.org is our website. Crossexamine with a D on the end of it. .org is our website. As you mentioned, we have a new book that Phoenix Hayes and I wrote. You and I are both friends of Phoenix. She's a brilliant apologist who just graduated from Southern Evangelical Seminary recently and has I've worked with her for quite a while. I know you have a little bit as well. Mm-hmm. The book that we wrote, The War on Reality, Recovering Truth in a World That Celebrates Lies, was started about a year before what happened to Charlie. So we had this in the works, but when that awful event occurred, we devoted the book to Charlie. And the first chapter is about not only what happened that day, but what happened in the few days leading up to it. It covers the whole Israel thing as well. And people tell me that for a book to be seen by a lot of people, you need a lot of pre-orders. So if you're interested at all in the book, we'd appreciate you ordering a hard copy, pre-order it, because then Amazon says, oh, look at all these people that want to buy the book. And then they start advertising it more so more people see it. So if you're interested in it, I hope you are, check that out. There was one other thing I wanted to say, other than pray for Erica and TPUSA. Oh, we haven't talked about this yet, but why does the Bible always talk about having at least 2 witnesses? Right? This is, of course, pre-video days, pre-DNA. If you're going to convict somebody of a crime, you have to have at least 2 witnesses. We actually have video now of Charlie Kirk being shot by Tyler Robinson. And all those witnesses there. Are there witnesses for anything Candace Owens has said? Are there any witnesses? No, she just comes up with possibilities, speculations. Meanwhile, people involved who have been smeared by what she's been saying, and it's not just her, there's others out there, have their livelihoods taken from them, like Brian Harpool, are being smeared, have their security jeopardized. You know, our family has, every time I go to a college campus now, we have to bring a security team, which didn't have to do before Charlie. Now I have to do it. By the way, one other quick thing. Occam's razor, don't multiply causes beyond necessity. Why does anyone think a vast conspiracy is required for this crime when all the evidence shows a radical leftist who was involved in a trans relationship decided that Charlie needed to die? Because, you know, we've never seen trans violence before, right? We've never seen that, right? No, we've seen plenty of it.
Yeah.
So the most obvious cause of the murder was a radicalized leftist who ironically thought Charlie Kirk was a fascist, because, Alisa, we all know that a characteristic of a fascist is to give your opponent the microphone and let him say whatever he wants so you can respond calmly to what he said. No, the person that shot Charlie is the fascist. It's an ultimate war on reality to suggest anything other. None of this makes sense. None of these conspiracy theories make any sense. They have no evidence. They're all possible, but there's no evidence. We need evidence for justice. And the Bible talks about that. Common sense talks about that. If you're going to convict someone of a crime, you need evidence. And we have evidence that Tyler Robinson has murdered Charlie Kirk. We don't have evidence that virtually anything Candace Owens has said is true. And that's why nobody's bringing it up in a court of law.
Yeah. And that's a huge, important thing to think about, as with so much else that we've talked about in this episode. I want to thank my guest, Frank Turek, and I really do want to encourage you. Let's make this book blow up, The War on Reality. And like Frank said, pre-orders help so much, just for Amazon to know, and other retailers, that we need to order more of this, and maybe we need to print more. And let's make this blow up, The War on Reality. Of course, we're going to have Phoenix and Frank back on the show very soon to talk all about the book. Very excited about that. And let's remember, as we pursue Christ, to keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin. We'll see you next time.